We need to keep a tight schedule. Hello? Yes? So we now move to the second session where we have John Ilan from Kent and Eric Newson, you already met, who will be speaking for the statutory 10 or 12 minutes and then followed by questions. First of all, if I can use my chairman's prerogative, I asked Eric in the interval about a case that I'd photocopied in the law school this morning, and he said, yes, that's very interesting, why didn't you raise it? I said, well, I can't do it, the opportunity's gone. And he said, well, you're chairing the next session, so it's all, you do what you like. So I will do what I like. It may be of no interest at all, but I throw it out for what it's worth. There was one of the first cases, probably the first reported case under the first Race Relations Act in the mid-60s, a case involving a prosecution of a West Indian called Malik. One of the points he raised in his defence, and then in the Court of Appeal, unsuccessful, was that he as a West Indian was using words not in the way that your standard home counties lawyer wouldn't use them, and that they must be understood in that specialist sense, and so understood they could not be possibly construed as inciting racial hatred. We don't know what the words are because they were censored. You look at it said, well, it's the Lord Chief Justice no less, he said the court refrained from referring any detail or at all if possible to the actual words used. So that's all. The only hint that got out from behind the screen was the words later in the judgment, again supposedly said by Malik, I want to tell you about souls. The black man has soul, the white man has no soul, he is a soulless person. Anyway, I give that what it's worth. You may say boring, get on with the next. So let's on with the motley, as it were.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here and very much thrilled to have been invited. So what I'm going to talk about over my 10 minutes is about grime music. This is one of the words that came up earlier on today in that Etna and Khaled both kind of referred to the fact that the people that they were working with in the context of the UK trials were writing, I suppose, grime lyrics as opposed to rap lyrics per se. So just first of all to say, I mean, as a kind of a very rough, I'll explain why, it's a very rough rule of thumb, you can kind of understand rap and grime as equivalent. So that makes it easier for people who mightn't be terribly familiar with kind of niche and obscure urban music genres to understand what grime is. Grime actually comes from an entirely different genealogy to rap. So if you're a music nerd like myself and you care about these things, grime music actually derives from electronic dance music, from house music, which became garage in particular parts of New York. That garage music was kind of imported into the UK, where predominantly black audience preferred it to be sped up, so they played the records much faster, became speed garage, so they're called UK garage, and the UK garage scene became very glamorous, infiltrated the mainstream pop charts in the UK. Some people might know Craig David, better or worse. And yeah, I guess.
He's not the one who was
that was my guess.
Nice try.
It's not Craig David.
All day. Yeah.
That scene was seen as quite, there's a kind of a whole sense of glamour around that, people dressing very well, ordering expensive drinks, and kind of young kids from the States, kind of who'd wear tracksuits, who'd wear streetwear, weren't welcome at these gigs. They weren't welcome kind of in terms of the production community, in terms of the MC community. So those kind of guys got together and played on the garage sound and made a kind of sort of electronic dance music with vocals chatted on top of it, sort of for the southern English streets, particularly the London streets, and that became known after a while as grime. That emerged around 2001. It's a lot faster than rap music. It's generally about 140 beats per minute. But in some ways, it can be understood as roughly similar to rap music in that, again, it is seen as this organic and authentic kind of product of the streets, certainly in its kind of earliest forms, and it does use a kind of a produced backing track that different vocalists would rhyme or spit over. And this kind of genre really coalesced around pirate radio. It's kind of a criminal phenomenon you don't see so much anymore because of the internet. But very interestingly, and kind of building on some of the work that Ethna did around how rappers really pioneered the use of music technology, I think you could say that grime artists really pioneered the use of digital online technology to disseminate their music. So very, very early days of grime there, for example, selling tracks by SMS text message. You know, send a text message for 99 pence, you get a link back and you can download. That never really took off in a huge way, but very, very kind of enterprising, very kind of forward-thinking use of kind of new digital technologies. And in fact, it left the mainstream kind of in their wake. So that was really the early days. Grime eventually started to infiltrate the pop charts in and around 2008. It started traveling very top of the pop charts. Some of you guys may or may not know Dizzy Rascal. Don't know if he's gone stateside. Some of them became more or less successful. What's very interesting, I think, about UK grime, in kind of very much different to US rap music, is that for the grime artists to become commercially successful, they couldn't emphasise the street nature of their work. They had to actually mute the kind of gangsterism in the lyrics and talk more about partying, alcohol, girls, dancing, this sort of thing. So it was actually by muting the kind of gangster content of their lyrics, softening the sound of their productions, etc., that they were able to infiltrate the pop charts. And successful grime artists today tend to maintain what I call a dual repertoire. Even Dizzy Rascal continues to release mixtapes for free online once or twice a year, and they still get a lot of love in the grime community, you know. But if you were a fan of him in his pop star kind of persona, you might never know that. So it's interesting, they very much have this dual repertoire, some of the more successful ones. So I'll say a couple of things now. I'll talk about the kind of particular lyrical conventions of grime, and I'll say something about grime as a part of UK youth street culture more generally. Okay, the first thing to say, I suppose, about grime is that because it is part of this much geographically smaller scene, kind of much less populous scene than US rap, kind of people tend to know each other to a certain extent within the scene. Things get quite personal in a music kind of way, and clashing is still very central to the entire genre. Whereas, you know, hip-hop battles occur and there are some celebrity beefs, but I think, you know, clashing or battling isn't quite as central to US rap anymore, but still very much kind of forms the basis of grime lyrics. So very often you have this convention where grime artists will write their lyrics in the first person, referring to a second person in the second person, and it very much tends to be, I'm the best and I'm going to kill you. That's kind of the convention that's used very often. But the key thing to recognise there is that they're talking about a kind of a lyrical killing, a lyrical murder, which is a kind of concept that would come, you know, back from sound system reggae and this sort of thing. So kind of on that Caribbean music genealogy. So this is pure metaphor. You know, there's loads of different words and different forms of slang that would be used to make these threats very much in inverted commas. Words like murk, you know, which means to kill. Frequent references to the skeng, the knife, the leng, the gun, you know, to bullets, to shooting, to all kinds of gruesome murder. But they are very much just talking about how they're going to lyrically dominate their opponent. It's not meant to be taken literally in any sense of the word. And this is a refrain, just seeing. Actually, I was very glad that Cal passed around, you know, his grime lyrics, if you look through that, you can understand that very much in that sense. He's talking about himself in the first person, to somebody else in the second person, I am going to kill you. And that would not necessarily have any connection to violence in the real world, but the kind of the metaphor of violence completely permeates the genre. For example, if one was at a grime rave and a song that you like comes on, you might make gun fingers and shout rap, you know, an imitation of gunfire. But again, this is part of the kind of being in the audience at one of these events. It's part of the conventions of the genre. Again, it's not meant to indicate any real gunfire, etc., etc. And I suppose the other thing to kind of say is that similar to US rap, that there tends to be particular themes that are spoken about. You know, you do have the kind of more social reality lyrics, which again might involve a certain amount of crime. Very often that can be real crime that they've witnessed, and that could be, you know, real crime that they're afraid of or plagues their community. But again, you know, trying to use that as evidence for anything that the lyric writer might have been involved in would be, you know, beyond tenuous. And also I think it's really important to say that using a word I'm borrowing from, I think, Jeffries, he talks about the dissonance of urban music, that, you know, most urban musicians in their repertoire will have a whole range of different themes they might talk about: spirituality, love, violence, partying, drug dealing, etc. So even with the violent metaphors, there tends to be quite a lot of other themes going on. And actually an interesting one, which you don't see, I think, nearly as much in US rap music, certainly mainstream US rap music, is that of education and entrepreneurialism. It's very common for a grime artist to boast about their educational achievements, how they've gone to school, gone to university, got a degree, how they know what they're doing, how they run a business. And again, this would be very different from the kinds of money making that the US rappers tend to talk about. This tends to be about running a small business, doing things for yourself, not becoming extremely rich, but making things slowly. And there's one lyric that I really like where one particular grime artist says to his opponent, you know, you want to get a rewind in a rave, you want to get accolades in the rave, I want a big backyard in Finchley. So he's basically saying, you know, I want the same thing that my dentist has. I want a nice middle-class house, white picket fence, etc., etc. So, you know, there tends to be a lot more realism in terms of the financial gains to be made. Because, of course, any British artist, without breaking into America, isn't going to become extremely rich. You know, as some of the much older UK hip-hop artists would say, it pays my mortgage. You know, so it's a kind of a different thing there. Thank you very much. So just to say then, the role of grime music in British youth street culture more generally. This, you know, much like in the very earliest days of US rap, and I'm sure still is the case, amongst ordinary everyday young people from disadvantaged backgrounds in the UK, grime music forms parcel of the fabric of everyday life. People be playing it on their phones. It's across all kinds of media. A lot of ordinary young people will write lyrics themselves on an amateur basis. Some of them will hope to make it. Some of them will just hope to get on a microphone at a dance, at an event. And it might never go further than that. So this is a scene that's extremely porous. You certainly have kind of very successful people that everyone who knows about the music would have heard of. But there's just a million other then kind of young MCs who might get, you know, very, very varying levels of success. And the interesting thing is that this kind of emerges very organically from communities of young people. So other young people from the same estates, from the same areas, may or may not be involved in criminality of various different kinds. What some people might call gang criminality. I don't like the word at all, but we can get into that at another point. So very fluid boundaries that certainly you have had incidents where people who do profess a involvement in gangs, again, will go onto YouTube with their own kind of homemade videos, which of course are actually tend to be really slickly produced. the cheapness and broad availability of digital recording equipment. I mean, some of these are really good videos, but very much done at an amateur level. And so you have, as people have said, this phenomenon where I think police intelligence have gotten terribly confused. Because unless you're very sort of subculturally knowledgeable, it's very difficult to understand, well, what are hood videos made by gangs where guns are being brandished, etc., and what's a music video? You know, what's a piece of art, a piece of fiction? So this has led to an awful lot of mislabeling, I think, and there's huge potential. Again, where you would have videos with, upwards 30, 40, 50 people in the background dancing. This would be a kind of a scene from an estate at night where all the young people are gathered. The people who are involved in crime, say, and those who are just musicians, everyone will be on the same video. And again, this, as I said, occurs very organically because of the nature of kind of street culture, street life in the UK. And of course, what you do see, and this is my very last point, is you've actually seen concert bands, you've seen record labels being rang up, etc., by the police saying, we have good intelligence that this person is involved in a gang, etc., and has made things a little bit more difficult for certain artists to manage to make a living nonetheless. And I'll leave it at that, happy to answer questions.